Okay, we're now recording the notes for section 5.3, adding and subtracting fractions. Funny story, this is the second time I've done these notes because the first time I forgot to press record. So that's why I had to go through and erase. That's why it might not look quite as clean as before. All right, so when we're adding and subtracting fractions, we need a common denominator, and we learned how to find the common denominator during 5.2 when we were in class, because the common denominator is also called the least common multiple. So we have two different situations. If the fractions already have the same denominators, then the way you add them is you either add or subtract the tops only, the numerators, the bottoms or the denominators stay the same. If the fractions have different denominators, which quite honestly is going to happen to you in most cases, then the first thing you have to do is find the lowest or least common denominator, which again is the same thing as the least common multiple that we've done before, but I'll review it with you. Write equivalent fractions that have the lowest common denominator as the denominator, and then you just add or subtract the numerators, keep the denominators the same, and then of course reduce your fraction if necessary. That's all from the beginning of the chapter. So let's go to our examples. So for this first example, all we want to do is find the lowest common denominator, or the least common denominator for the fractions. We're not adding or subtracting them at this point. So lowest common denominator between 4 and 9. When the numbers are this small, you should be able to use the multiple approach. In other words, what is the smallest number that both 4 and 9 divide into evenly? Well, if you don't know that just off the top of your head, you just take 9 times 1, that's 9, but 4 doesn't go into 9. 9 times 2 is 18, 4 doesn't go into 18. 9 times 3 is 27. 4 doesn't go into 27. 9 times 4 is 36. And yes, 4 divides into 36 evenly. So our lowest common denominator is just going to be 36. That's the smallest number that 4 divides into evenly, as well as 9 divides into evenly. Let's look at B. Let's do 10 and 15. Let's do that multiple approaches again. So 15 times 1, always take the largest number. 15 times 1 is 15. 10 doesn't divide into 15. 15 times 2 is 30. 10 does divide into 30. So 30 is the smallest number that both 10 and 15 divide into evenly. So that would be our lowest common denominator. All right, so now let's go to example 2. Well, once I have the lowest common denominator, then I have to write each of my fractions so that it has that lowest common denominator. So we've actually done a problem like this before. Let me show you the steps. So what is the equivalent fraction for 2/3 that has a denominator of 18? So what you want to do is you want to look at 2/3. You want to make the denominator into an 18. Well, let's see. 3 times what is 18? 3 times 6. So that means you automatically also have to multiply the top by 6. So my new numerator is 12. So this is equivalent to the 2/3, but it just has a denominator of 18. So now let's put it all together. Let's do our first actual problem where we're going to combine these fractions. So our first thing that we have to do is to find the lowest common denominator. Well, what's the smallest number that both 8 and 3 divide into evenly? I hope you can tell that it's going to be 24. Once we have that lowest common denominator, now let's go ahead. Now this step's going to take a while, but don't skip it. It will really help you. So we're going to rewrite the first fraction, 2/3. We need that denominator to be a 24. So what would I have to multiply 3 by that's going to get me a 24? The answer is 8. And then, of course, if I multiply the bottom by 8, I also have to multiply the top by 8. Now we're going to take and we're going to rewrite the second fraction. And we want to, again, look at the denominator. What would I have to multiply 8 by? That's going to get me my lowest common denominator of 24. Well, 8 times 3 is 24, so I have to multiply the 8 by 3, which of course means I have to automatically multiply the top by 3 as well. Now you can stop this and go back and you can look at that over and over again until you get the idea. So now what we're going to do is we're going to multiply. 2 times 8 is 16 over 3 times 8 is 24, plus negative 3 times 3 is negative 9 over 24. Now we have them over the common denominator. So what did the rules say? Well, when we're adding or subtracting, we combine the top. So 16 plus negative 9 is 7. The denominators stay the same. And of course, if that's fraction simplified, for example, if both top and bottom were divisible by 2, then you would simplify it like we've done in other sections. All right, let's go on to the next problem. Now for this one, since the numbers are a little bit bigger, I wanted to just quick remind you of another way to find your lowest common denominator. We learned it by using factor trees. So I'm just going to kind of use this space up here, and I'm going to remind you of how we did that. So if I take 18, and if I make its factor tree, and I'm going to take 15 and do the same thing. Oops, let me get over here so you can see the 15. All right, so what multiplies together to get 18? Well, 2 times 9 does. The 2 doesn't break down any further, but your 9 breaks down into 3 times 3. What multiplies together to get 15? 3 times 5. Those are prime numbers, so we are done. So our 18 we could write as 2 times 3 squared because there were 2 3's. And the 15 is just 3 times 5. So now, what did we do with that? Well, to find the least common multiple, or in this case, the lowest common denominator, it's the same thing. Remember what we did is we took one of each type of object. In this case, they're all numbers. So in our LCD, we need a 2, we need a 3, and we need a 5. And then we took the largest exponent that appeared on any of those individual numbers. So you can see that there's a squared right here on the 3. So we need that in our LCD. And now that is our LCD. If we multiply it all out, we get 90. So that is our lowest common denominator. So if I go back to the problem, I know my LCD is 90. That's the smallest number that 18 and 15 both divide into evenly. All right, so now, just like before, we're going to rewrite the first fraction. We need to multiply top and bottom by the same number. 18 times what is 90? Well, the answer is 5. So if I multiply top and bottom by 5, that's going to give me a denominator of 90. Minus, we're going to rewrite the second fraction. I'm going to have to multiply top and bottom there by the same number. 15 times what is 90? Well, it's 15 times 6 is 90. So top and bottom have to be multiplied by 6. So if I go ahead and multiply, I'm going to get 25 over 90 minus 4 times 6 is 24. Over 90. Now I can go ahead. I'm going to subtract the numerators. 25 minus 24 is 1, and the denominator stays the same. All right. Hopefully that's going well so far. So far we've been doing arithmetic, no variables involved. So let's go ahead and let's go on to our next page. Right up here, notice we have some variables. But actually, in this case, I think the variables are going to make it a little bit simpler for us. So if we look at A, we need to find the lowest common denominator. So what is the smallest expression that x and 2x divide into evenly? Well, we need a 2 and we need an x. And that is simply it. Don't overthink it. Because look, if we go, and now if we rewrite the first fraction, top and bottom have to be multiplied by something. What would the bottom have to be multiplied to make it look like the LCD? Well, they both have to be multiplied by 2. Let's rewrite the second fraction. Well, notice the second fraction is already over the lowest common denominator, so it doesn't have to be multiplied by anything at all. I guess if you really wanted to, you could multiply them both by 1, but is that going to make a difference? No. So if we go ahead and multiply, 5 times 2 is 10, and that's going to be over 2 times x, minus 3 times 1 is 3, and that's also going to be over 2x. Let's subtract the tops. 10 minus 3 is 7, and it goes over the denominator of 2x.